When we were here together last time, and one of the stories told was about that Zen master building a monastery beside the Taoist temple. And out of that story arises the recognition of what is called the power of Wu. And from this story we can glean that it came about from an understanding of having and not having, which brought about an awareness of constancy versus inconstancy, with constancy being the power of Wu. And then on Sunday, there were several stories told about duty. And arising out of that was the recognition that duty is synonymous with, or even can be called, the Dharma. So we have the power of Wu, constancy. We have the Dharma, duty. Let's see what arises when we put two more stories together and whether they can make a trilogy for us. The first is a story about three brothers who were not monks, but they had aspirations to attain enlightenment. So they decided to travel together to a far-off place where they could learn of how to attain their goal. On the way, they happened to stay at the house of a woman who just recently lost her husband, leaving her with 7 children. The brothers stayed overnight, and the next morning, when they were due to resume their journey, the youngest brother said to the older brothers, "Go ahead, I will remain here." The brothers were very angry with him, but he was adamant, and so they had to leave him at that place. Of course, he was a great help to the widow and her children. And so, first of all, the widow said to him, "Will you stay with me?" And the implication of that was that he would become her partner, of course. But understanding this, he said, "You must give honor to your husband. So for 3 years, be in that state where you respect his passing." After 3 years, the widow approached him once again. "How long will you stay? Perhaps we can be married." And the young man, now not quite so young, said, "Now it is for me to respect your husband's passing. I will honor him for 3 years." And so the 3 years passed, and again the widow, who had grown to love the young man, said, "Now you have been with us for so long. Can we be married and make partnership?" And the man said, "Now let us both together respect and honor your deceased husband. And so another 3 years passed. And one day, the young man, now not so young, came to the widow and said, "Now your children are grown and able to take care of you. Today I resume my journey." And he left to move towards the monastery that was his destination. The second story is about that great Tibetan saint amongst the pantheons of great Tibetan lamas, Patrul Rinpoche. But Patrul Rinpoche was renowned for his humbleness. When he travelled as a wandering mendicant hermit, not even wearing the robes of the monk. And there was an occasion when Patrul Rinpoche was invited to a great monastery in Tibet to propound and pass on the teachings at a great festival. But he had to travel a great distance to get there. And during his travels, he came across a woman with 3 young children whose husband had been recently attacked and killed by a great bear. So he found the woman crying and wailing by the side of the road, and he asked her where she was going. She told him tearfully her story of how she'd lost her husband and that she'd heard that there was a great festival being held, and she thought if she went there she would be able to get alms so that she could feed her children. And Patrul Rinpoche said, "Well, it so happens that I'm heading that way myself. Perhaps we can travel together." And so they did. Each village that they came to, the woman and Patrul Rinpoche would go in with their begging bowls to get whatever it was that was given to them as alms. And when they travelled together in the great snows of that time, Patrul Rinpoche would wrap the children under his fur cloak to keep them warm at night. The woman found herself becoming calm and peaceful in his presence. Indeed, she grew to love him, not only rely on him for the food and other comforts of the journey. But as they came close to the great monastery in which the festival was to be held, Patrul Rinpoche said to the woman, "I must leave you here because people will gossip." And she said, "But oh, I've grown to love you. Can we not be together?" And he said very firmly to her that this was not possible, that he must leave her here. But when she came to the place where the festival was to be held, he said, "We will reunite." And so Patrul Rinpoche went off And of course, when he arrived at the monastery, there was great pomp and ceremony to welcome him, this great, very great saint, with his knowledge, his wisdom, and his presence. And so, the day of the festival, many, many people were gathered. The woman, with her 3 children, came to the back of the crowd of people who'd gathered. Patrol Rinpoche, in all of his finery, his conical hat and his robes, stood up before the great throng and gave what is known as his powerful teaching, the teaching not only of the knowledge of the history of Buddhism, but of his presence. After the ceremony, everyone lined up to receive his blessing. Amongst them was the woman. And when she came before him and recognized her humble and faithful companion of the previous days, she wept and apologized for asking him to marry her, for treating him as she did. But Patrol Rinpoche, in his way, gave her blessing. He had already instructed the monks, who were greatly surprised because he never usually gathered anything, when he had told them that they should take the gifts of the butter and flour and goods that were given to be passed on, and these he gave to the woman to keep her and her children for the following days. Constancy versus inconstancy, or the power of Wu, the Dharma, duty, responsibility, and so on, and so on. The power of Wu, the Dharma. But what arises out of these 2 stories to make our trilogy, the power of Wu, the Dharma, what is it that arises for you? A recognition, an awareness of what these 2 stories, what their essence represents for us to make this trilogy. Constancy, that which does not change. The power of Wu, duty, the Dharma. What do these stories tell us?